I'm Haley Taylor, and you're listening to the Rough Draft Diaries. It's All Hallows Eve. Tomorrow is Halloween, which means I'm up to some spooky stuff on this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries. I'm in Perrysburg, Ohio, at Fort Meigs in the middle of the night. I'm doing the Garrison Ghost Walk, which means a guide will lead you around the grounds as you hear some eerie tales about this historic place. Our group is all lined up in the back of the Welcome Center for our tour to start. All of the Fort Meigs employees are dressed in historical garb, carrying lanterns and wearing bonnets and shiny boots. I realize I look a little odd with all the equipment I'm carrying around. I've got my headphones on, the recorder in my left hand, the shotgun mic in my right, and the man next to me leans over and asks what I'm doing.
I work for WGC.
I explain where I'm from, and with a sigh of relief, he says, "I thought it was ghost hunting equipment." As the previous group returns back to the Welcome Center, we're off on our tour, ready to walk in the dark to our first stop, which just happens to be a brief history of Fort Meigs.
The reconstructed fort that you're going to be walking through tonight was built on the site of the original fort that was built during the War of 1812.
It was first built as a reaction to British attacks on American forts in the Northwest Territory. Ground was broken in 1813, just in time for a British attack under the command of General Henry Proctor and Chief Tecumseh. After multiple British attacks, the Americans sustained victory, and the fort was torn down, reopening in the 1970s as a memorial.
So this reconstructed 10-acre fort that you see was really only active for 6 or 7 months. But during that short time period, a lot of men died here. The regulars that died while they were here are buried in this ground where we're standing. It's not surprising that when people come out to the fort, they say they see ghosts.
And with those comforting words, we're on our way to our next stop. There's a storyteller sitting around a campfire, again in 1812 garb, about to tell the tale of a young soldier who was recruited into the war from his hometown in Chillicothe, Ohio, just about an hour south from Columbus. His name was Larkin Johnston.
He was a teenager, actually. His mother didn't want him to go, but he went anyway. When it was determined that it was time for the company to march up to Fort Meigs here in 1813, Larkin thought that he would steal away and walk 10 miles to see his mother on his family farmstead. He went back and visited her, but on his way back to join the army, he ran into one of his neighbors that was driving a wagon. The neighbor turned him in to the army as a deserter.
Desertion was a serious offense, a crime which could put you in front of a firing squad, which Johnston, along with 5 other deserters, were destined to meet once they arrived in Fort Meigs from Chillicothe, Ohio.
The whole army was drawn up, and the 6 condemned men were brought out, and they were made to kneel in front of their coffins, dressed only in their trousers and their shirts. So without further ado, the officer in command gave the orders. Make ready, take aim, fire.
Johnston and the 5 other deserters fell to the ground. Except there was a catch.
You see, the squad in front of him had been issued blank cartridges. The officers thought it was inhumane to execute such a young man. And so he was stood up, he was put back in the ranks, and he was ordered to serve out the rest of his term of enlistment in the army with no further repercussions.
So Johnston continued to fight, battle after battle, eventually making his way up to Commodore Perry's fleet on Lake Erie. But his boat, along with others, was stuck in a terrible storm. Most of the boats capsized, and Johnston was written off as a drowned soldier.
That isn't the end of it, though. The next spring in 1814, he showed up again in Chillicothe. When he came down the lane, his dog, which he had raised from a puppy, barked and snarled at him like he was a perfect stranger. When he knocked on the door and his mother answered the door, she looked at him and she didn't recognize his face at all. She looked at him as if he was a random soldier coming back from the war. Unable to convince her that he was her son was a complete loss, and he went off and no one really knows what became of him. Some people say, though, that he returned here to the place where his destiny and his fate parted ways. By rights, he should have been shot dead as a deserter. They say to this day he lurks around the pickets of the fort, looking for some way out of his predicament.
I know these stories were meant to be scary, but honestly, I just felt really bad for these poor soldiers. Almost every tale involved a young kid away from his mom, fighting in brutal combat or being washed ashore tangled in shipwreck. I kind of hoped the ghost of Private Johnston would show up on our tour, so then I could walk over and give him a hug. Can you hug a ghost? I was in a predicament as to how I was going to end this story. As with each historic tale, I just became more sad for the state of young men in war. But luckily, at one stop, there was some lighter fare. A poem about Frankenstein was recited, and that's how we're going to end this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries.
When Frankenstein prepared to dine on ham and cheese on wheat, he found instead he had no bread, nor mustard, cheese, nor meat. What could he do? He thought it through until his brain was sore, then thought he ought, say what he could, borrow from next door. The neighbors gawked as Frankie walked the path up to their porches. Each time he tried, the folks inside would chase him off with torches. A monster eat! The people shriek, will make him go away. The angry hordes unsheathe their swords, while pitchforks out of hay. They threw tomatoes, pigs, potatoes, and loaves of moldy bread. And then a thought struck Frankenstein as pickle struck his head. It's true, at first he thought the worst his neighbors were so rude, but then he found that on the ground they'd made a mound of food. So he piled it high, and waved goodbye, and shouted thanks a bunch, and then he stacked it all on a plate and ate a big, disgusting lunch. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Next off to your right. Thank you.